Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video, and today guys we're going to be going through some first impressions of the new confirmed command point changes that will be coming in Warzone Nephilim. Now I know I did a video recently on this discussing the rumoured changes, but I wanted to go through in a little bit more detail the actual changes and how I think specifically they're going to affect Guard now we know what the heck is coming. So essentially guys, we were pretty spot on in that last video. We will have to pay for a Warlord Traits, we are going to pay for relics. You are going to start with 6 command points in a Strike Force game, and hell, you're only going to start with 3 in an Incursion game, which is pretty low to be honest. Not very many at all for those people that like to play smaller point games of 40k. So the other way that they have changed things as well is not only with halving the amount that you start, but they have confirmed they're doubling the amount that you gain throughout the game. So for example, you'll gain 1 in your command phase and 1 in your opponent's command phase. Now this actually opens up a couple of interesting little sort of points of discussion. Firstly, GW have claimed that even though you start with half because you gain twice as many, it all balances out. That's not actually correct. It seems a little bit pedantic, but actually under the old system we used to start with 12 and we gained 5, and now under the new system we start with 6 and we gain 10. So we're actually, all armies will be starting with at least 1 CP fewer. Now that might not seem like a huge amount, but those of you that play like a lot of competitive armies, and specifically those people that play competitive Guard, you're going to be seeing the fact that starting with 1 CP, you're going to feel it. Because all of our sticking plasters are kind of CP related, and we're going to get into this a little bit more detail later on. But 1 less CP is 1 less load fire reload, which is one of the best stratagems that we have right now. So it is actually a pretty big deal. So it's not quite equal to what it used to be. That's just something I wanted people to be aware of. Another point that's kind of interesting is that it makes going second, interestingly, a bit better. Because if you go second, then you get 1 CP in your phase that your opponent can't really interact with. And you don't need to worry about saving it for like a CP reroll. It's like, right, I've got an extra CP that I can use and my opponent can't really interact with it. Whereas if you go first, you gain your extra CP, but you know, you don't know whether you need to save it or not for your like opponent's turn. So in a funny sort of way, going second gives you almost a carefree final CP, whereas going first means you're not sure if you want to keep the extra CP or not, depending on what your opponent's going to do in their turn. Obviously, you will gain 1 in your own turn, you know, in your opponent's turn when they go second, of course. But it does mean that you don't know whether you're going to hoard a couple of CP, you know, for like transhuman on a big block of something or whatever. So it does interestingly open up a discussion around what is better in terms of CP. Going first or going second. I've heard arguments made for both ways, but it seems at the moment that people are saying that in terms of gaining the extra CP throughout the end of the game, getting it at the end, getting it going second is actually better. And so interestingly, it seems like GW is pushing people more and more towards, like, you know, not relying on going first to win. Going second actually has its benefits. So that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it, but we'll see how that actually pans out. I still think going first has a lot of advantages. Now, the next point I want to take a look at is the fact that you have to pay for your Warlord trait and your relic now. And straight up, guys, this is actually really bad for Guard. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a CP hungry faction, and if we want to get a tank case, we have to spend essentially another CP on it now, because you can't just trade your free Warlord trait away. Likewise, if you want to get 2 tank cases now, you're going to have to spend 2 command points. So kind of one of the staples of every Guard list, which has been 2 full payload manticores, is really not looking very good right now. The fact that Hour of Contempt kind of nerfs manticores quite badly, the fact that they got a 10-point increase, the fact that they now can't get, now that you're going to spend 2 CP on them to get them both full payload, it's just not looking good. The problem is that it's not like we have an alternative. Basilisk is full payload are an alternative, don't get me wrong, but my point is that we kind of need that flat damage 3 artillery. We need it. And so these are kind of 2 CP, which I feel like we are going to have to spend. So realistically, Guard players aren't starting with 6 CP. Realistically, we're starting with 4. Another thing to take into account is that now you're going to have to pay a CP for Gatekeeper, which in essence means all of our flat damage 3 is locked behind a CP paywall. That's really, really annoying because we don't have access like other factions to D3+3 damage weapons. we have access to 3 good sources of damage, which is your full payloads, your Gatekeeper, and your Demolisher. And Demolisher is still swingy. I mean, how many of us have been there when you're shooting a 2-wound model, be it like a Sanguinary Guard, be it like a Primaris Marine, be it anything, and you shoot it, you roll your Demolisher cannon, and you get a 1 damage. And then you've got to spend a CP to command point re-roll it. But now, you don't have as many command points to do that, so it reduces the efficiency of your Demolisher cannons as well. So it's just really, really annoying. I'm not a big fan of these changes at all. Not for Guard. You know, just when we were climbing our way back up, it means that now we're just knocked back down again. Pretty much all of my current lists that I've been building are starting with very few CP. If I look at any of my hybrid Guard lists, I'm starting with no CP. If I'm looking at my pure infantry list, I'm starting with no CP. If I'm looking at my mechanized army, I'm looking at starting with what, 3 if I'm lucky. It's not good, and I kind of understand why GW was doing it. We're going to get to that in a moment, but it's just frustrating. It feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. And this kind of leads me on to my next point, which is we haven't had our 9th edition codex yet. But, I mean, this is going to affect a lot of armies, whether they're 9th edition or not. But what we have had over the course of 9th edition is a lot of sticking plasters. We've had a lot of new stratagems. We've had a lot of things which essentially go, okay, you haven't got a codex, but we're going to give you loads and loads of stratagems doing the Greater Good and Rising Octarius and all these other things. We're going to give you these stratagems. But now we don't have the CP to use any of those stratagems. So it's like it's because we don't have a 9th edition codex, we don't have loads of abilities built into our data sheets. We just have essentially, our stratagems are essentially our data sheet abilities, but GW have just sort of given them to them in these different books. But now we can't actually use any of our abilities. And it's just really, really frustrating. Because, yeah, sure, I get it. GW don't want people just like dumping command points in turn 1 and turn 2, and people just like blowing people off the board. But the thing is, like, we don't have an alternative. Again, I would have no issue with these changes if we had a viable alternative, but we don't. And the problem is that all this is going to do is screw over those armies that were built at the beginning of 9th edition, or the ones that through various patches have become reliant on command points to be command point heavy. It's going to those armies are now going to get in the bin, and then the other armies, which clearly weren't designed with this change in mind, but have been positively affected by the fact that GW seems to recently be making every stratagem cost like 1 CP, are now just going to be in a strong position. This is only going to make the winners win harder and the losers lose harder. That's all it's going to do. Because, yeah, sure, you might have some turn armies that were like dumping CP into stuff. Well, you know what? The turn data sheets themselves are so strong that they don't need the command points. Whereas the Guard data sheets are not strong and they need the command points. So all this does, I don't think this necessarily rebalances anything. I think this just kind of pisses everyone off in a funny sort of way. It's weird. I mean, I know a lot of people are just really unhappy with the change. I know a lot of people who were struggling, who were like, well, at least I can kind of make my units good by spending CP per game, and now they can't. I know multiple people who have been like, yeah, my Harlequins army starts on like -4 CP now. My Admech army starts on like -3 CP. And it's like, that's not ideal. That's not, I mean, yeah, sure, maybe, Crimea River fucking Harlequins, right? Yeah, I know, I get it. But still, it's still not great. But hey, maybe it's working as intended. Hell, if Harlequins get reined in a bit, maybe it's intended. I do feel bad for Admech players at this point, because Admech really do seem to be struggling at the moment as much as Guard is. But no, I think it's so difficult, because one hand giveth with the new secondary, so we're going to be scoring well, but one hand taketh away, because now our damage output has been literally cut in half. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. I suppose it means that rather than being able to dump like 7 CP a turn, we're just going to be doing a little bit of damage consistently, but I just don't think our data sheets are... I don't think we're going to be around turn 5 to be able to make use of those last couple of CP. That's my concern. Now, this isn't all salt and doom and gloom. This actually does, in a funny sort of way, I am kind of positive about this in a funny sort of way, even though it screws me over. But GW is clearly trying to walk back the multiple detachment spam that people have been doing since the beginning of 8th. And this is the bigger step they've made in doing that. Because essentially, the moment you want to take 2 detachments, you're halving your CP. The moment you do that. The moment that you want to take a specialist detachment, I don't mean like a Vigilus one, I mean like an Outrider or a Spearhead or something, you're starting with half your CP. So this kind of is forcing everyone down a brigade or battalion. And that's interesting because there's a lot of old grognards like me out there who have rose tinted glasses about the time when everyone had to use the force organisation chart, which was basically everyone had to use battalion. There were no special detachments. It's a little bit different to battalion, but you know, it's near enough. And in a funny sort of way, like, I can't really be mad about that because I agree that when everyone had a force org chart, it did make life a little simpler and it did streamline things. The problem you kind of have, though, is that we're in this halfway house. And so, speaking specifically about Guard, we now find ourselves in a really tricky position. It's like, okay, GW, you want us to go down only having 1 detachment. Okay, I can dig it. I'll get on board with that. But I don't have platoons anymore. Which means that if you want me to just be stuck with 1 battalion, I can only get access to as many guardsmen as my opponents can get access to intercessors. And that's not equal. That's not equal at all. There's a reason why platoons existed in the old Imperial Guard Codex, because the game designers recognized that 60 guardsmen is not enough guardsmen. You know, you needed the ability to be able to take many guardsmen. So it's just really annoying, and it either means that we have to go down a battalion, at which point you're kind of essentially forced to go down a mechanized route unless you want to take conscripts. But then if you take conscripts, if they're not white shields, they're not as good. So immediately again, so you either go down mechanized or you don't go down conscripts. Now you're paying CP for white shields, so that's not good. So yeah, or they force you down the brigade route, and it's like, okay, sure, now I get access to 12 infantry squads or 12 troop choices, but now I can't. Now I'm less points efficient because I'm having to take tax units that I wouldn't normally take. Like, not everyone wants to take Scout Sentinels. They're good. They're a good sort of, they're not an S tier unit for Guard, but they're a good like upper B sort of tier unit for Guard. But at the end of the day, it's like not everyone wants to take Scout Sentinels, and you're not always going to run into Grey Knights. You're not always going to run into Dazzle Sentinels. I know I love my Scout Sentinels. I know I've been talking about them a lot. I do think they're a good unit. I think they're barely attacks now, but it's still attacks. You know, for example, my mechanized army doesn't make use of Scout Sentinels. I mean, maybe it should, but it doesn't right now. Likewise, you know, not everyone's going to want to be taking like 3 mandatory elite choices. Maybe you will, but maybe you won't. Not everyone's going to want to take access to 3 heavy support choices. It means that more than likely, you know, maybe you were running 3 heavy support and a couple of fast attack. Well, now you've got to spend another 35 points. Maybe you were running a couple of elite choices. Well, now you've got to spend another sort of 40 points. It just means we're having to spend more points. And at the end of the day, guys, we don't have any points to spare as Guard. Our stuff is overpriced. Depending on how these actual points changes drop, we're going to be in a really bad situation. We need points. If you're going to make us take Brigade GW, fine, but give us points cuts to make up for the difference. Even then, we're going to get diddled on CP because of, you know, having to take. You know, if you take a squad of white shields, 2 tank. If you take 2 squads of white shields, 2 tank cases, and gatekeeper, you start with 2 CP. That's awful. And so this kind of leads me on to my last point, which is this change outright just kills certain armies. And it's really annoying. Like the last changes they made just killed air cab, and it was like, oh, I'm sorry. Just because Orcs and Eldar are ruining it for everyone. You didn't have any issue with Guard players flying around with like multiple Valkyries, but you know now they can't. So that's just a whole army wiped out. Can you imagine if you had spent a year or so building up a beautiful air cab Vietnam style or Scion army, and it literally just got deleted? You can't run this anymore. That's insane. That's like, yeah, sure, you've got to cater for the majority, but that's a whole group of people who are literally have just been boxed out of the game. And likewise, looking at like pure infantry commanders like myself, we literally had to take 3 detachments, 3 battalions to make our armies work. If you didn't want to take conscripts, you want to take 3 battalions and take all professional infantry. That's basically dead now, because you can't take 3 battalions and have, well, you can take 3 battalions, but you literally get no command points, which is crazy. I suppose you could do it, but it's pretty mad as well. It is pretty mad that there's like whole certain armies which are literally just boxed out. Like, yeah, you're fluffy. The White Shield Army of Doom, that is literally non-existent. It's just crazy. Can you imagine if someone's gone out there and like, people will have done that and bought like 300 conscripts and then now they're all nerfed? They're just going to quit the game, man. This is the problem with this kind of change. It boxes people out, and that isn't great. But like I said, it is a balance. It is a balance patch at the end of the day. It is for competitive play at the end of the day. So do themed armies have a place there? You could easily argue like, no, not really. You know, we're bringing competitive games. You don't necessarily have to use these changes if you're just playing at home. At the end of the day, no one's stopping you from running your air cav army, really. It's up to you if you want to run it. No one's really stopping you using the infantry army. You can run it. You don't have to use these changes if you're just playing at home in the new battle bunkers. So yeah, I can, again, this is not a assault video. This is literally me doing for and against arguments for these changes. Now, the very last thing I want to mention, because I do want to end on a positive note, is this actually does bring potentially some real life back to certain characters that give you like command points. So, for example, in the Guard, I think Creed, who had kind of himself had almost been pushed out because you're like, why would you take Creed over a regular company commander? Now we've all got Voxcasters. Creed does the old switcheroo, pulls out the Uno reverse card, and it's like, haha, now you really want to take me because you make me your warlord, and I'm going to give you 2 CP. And it's like, oh, okay, fair enough, Creed, like, you're back in the box, boy. But, like, it's interesting because there's still some debate, and I know some people will argue hard that Creed, you can get your 2 free CP and make him your Warlord trait and still trade it out for a tank case. But I know there's like the order of operations, and I know people make good arguments for it, but I'm telling you, I've tried, TOs aren't letting me, my TOs aren't interpreting it that way. So that's just a personal thing for me. But basically, if you're running like a Cadian army, Creed is kind of mandatory now. Because if you're running like a standard Cadian army and you want your 3 tank commanders and your 2 full payload manticores, and maybe some white shields, we're going to start with -3 CP, but now if you take Creed, you can start with 5 CP, which is pretty good, and Creed isn't really attacked, he's pretty good. So it's interesting. I mean, how I kind of see it playing out now is that you're going to take a tank commander, you're going to make Creed your warlord, you're not going to pay for the warlord trait because you don't want to spend the CP there. So you start off with 6, you're taking a tank case, which means you start off with 5. You take a squad of white shields, 2 squads of white shields, which means you're starting off with 4. Then you take Gatekeeper, which means you're going to start off with 3. And then you're going to get 2 more back from Creed. So I feel like Creed is going to mean you're going to start with 5 or 6 CP, so he kind of balances this out. So yeah, I mean, I think Creed's pretty mandatory now. I think you're going to see a lot of other armies taking their warlord trait, their CP generating warlords. What I think needs to be addressed, it doesn't affect Gar, but affects other armies, is what happens if your warlord has multiple warlord traits. That's kind of interesting. Does it mean that you spend 1 CP for 3 traits on Mortarion? Or is Mortarion like almost like a part of his data sheet literally is broken now? I'm sure it'll be I'm sure it'll be FAQ'd or whatever, but it's an interesting point. So that's it, boys. That is all the things I want to talk about today. What are your thoughts on the change to command points? How does it affect your army? Is it positive, negative? Does it not affect you at all? And how are you going to adapt to this? Because at the end of the day, we've got to adapt, boys. And it's whilst these things can sting a little bit, I think Guard, we can adapt. It's going to suck for people that are running Scions and running Guard detachments, but now I guess you kind of push down sort of one route. I think, yeah, it is tricky, but Scions, it's a whole other video on how this is going to affect Scions, I think, but we'll have to play it out first and then see how it really affects them. But what are you guys thinking? How does this affect your army? Are you happy about it? Negative about it? Does it affect you at all, or had you already kind of adapted for this? Between this and the new secondaries, how do you think Guard are kind of sitting? I think the secondaries put us forward well. I think this pushes us back a little bit. I think overall guard, we're kind of clawing our way into bottom mid-tier, maybe even mid-tier. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. So we'll leave it there for today's video, guys. Bit of a, a salty one, but bit of a, I've tried to keep it as balanced as possible. If you've enjoyed today's videos, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. And if you've really enjoyed it and want to go the extra mile, please consider signing up to becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It really makes a huge difference. And I want to say a massive thank you to my current channel members and Patreon supporters. I mean, you guys know how much I appreciate you, but I like doing these shout outs like every single video because it really does mean a huge amount to me. So massive thank you to the Patreon supporters, massive thank you to the channel members. Honestly, you guys are just fantastic, and your generosity it blows me away every time I think about it. So huge thanks to you guys. And I want to do a couple of personal shout outs to some of our top tier Patreon supporters, the guys that are really going above and beyond and being super generous to the Mordian Glory channel. So I want to say a huge thank you to August Varney and John Stubbs for subscribing at the top tier of Patreon, the Lord General level. You guys, it's just absolutely fantastic. Just can't thank you enough. It's life-changing. It really is. So huge thank you to those guys. And I also want to give a massive thank you to Diesel Fox, Shooter McGavin and Swordfish Thumbs for being signed up at the Commissar level as well. Honestly, it's super generous of you guys and I just really appreciate it. So thank you. But I hope you enjoyed today's video, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.